Hey guys, this is finishing up Chapter 1. So, Chapter 1 talked about laws and values and goals of the legal system. There are also some definitional things here in Chapter 1. There's part of this chapter that talks about balancing rights and responsibilities. So, in the Bill of Rights and in the Constitution, we're given many rights, but with those rights comes responsibilities. Sounds a little bit like Spider-Man. With great power becomes responsibility, something like that, right? You comic geeks out there. Anyway, says while rights are important, they must be matched by social responsibilities. So if you have the right to a trial by jury, then it's also your responsibility then when you get that jury summons to be a part of that. So as soon as you turn 18 and you register to vote or you have your driver's license, you are in the pool for a possible jury member. And I know one time I had a high school student that got called for jury duty, but they let him wait until the summertime to do it. So it was after his senior year in high school, and he was able to do that. I personally have not been on a case. My wife was called one time, but then we actually moved before it came due. So I guess if you really want to avoid jury duty, you just have to move to a different county. But hopefully you won't mind serving on jury duty. Obviously, take off work and you don't get paid much, but it is a responsibility that we have if we want to have that right. And then also voting. As soon as you're old enough to vote, 18, you have that right, so your responsibility is to then get out and vote. This chapter also talks about different types of laws. So it talks about criminal laws, and criminal laws are legal action by the government against a person charged with committing a crime. And I think we all can think of different things that are crimes, so I don't think I have to really go through that a whole lot. When you're charged with a crime, if you do something really bad, you might be charged with a felony, and then you might end up in prison for over a year. Example is murder and robbery. And then for smaller crimes, you might get a misdemeanor, and that's less than a year in prison. So that might be minor theft. And well, in our criminal law unit, we'll actually talk a little bit more about felonies and gross misdemeanors and misdemeanors, and talk a little bit more about some examples of that. But for right now, these are just some definitional things in Chapter 1. Let's see. The defendant in criminal law, the person that is accused of committing the crime. So you can probably think of people that have been defendants. I would just put a picture of Martha Stewart on here, and then that crazy wacko guy from Colorado with the Batman movie and the shootings that happened there. But we can all think of defendants. That's what they're called in criminal court. And in criminal court, you need what's called beyond reasonable doubt. And so if you have any doubt as a jury, then you really have to vote not guilty. So you have to have beyond a reasonable doubt. Now that doesn't mean 100%, and it doesn't mean you have to have CSI information and everything has to be spelled out for the jury. It just means that a reasonable person must believe that this person is guilty. So if the jury has any reasonable doubts about the defendant's guilt, then must vote not to convict. The most classic case of this, well, maybe it's not even the most classic, because there's some more recent cases too of some crazy people seeming to get away with murder, perhaps. The jury's finding them not guilty, like Casey Anthony. But this one is O.J. Simpson. And so when I was in high school, this was the famous case where we all watched on TV, and he drove off in his white Bronco, and the cameras were following him, and we were all watching this police chase on TV. And of course, as you know, the glove didn't fit, so you must acquit, was the famous saying. And he did have some great attorneys, and he was able to be found not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And then, of course, he went on to write the book, If I Did It, which has some interesting excerpts in it, describing in detail how he would have done it. So kind of interesting, what sometimes the jury decides. The other type of court system is the civil court system, and here's just a cartoon here you can look at. just kind of talks about some of the crazy lawsuits that come up sometimes. It says, I'm suing the tobacco companies because I smoked for years and got lung cancer. No kidding, I'm suing the masonry companies because I repeatedly hit myself in the head with a brick and got brain damage. So you've heard about the people that will sue McDonald's for gaining weight, or the one at White Castle because the guy couldn't fit sitting down at the table, and they went make a larger table for him. And so there are some lawsuits like that, but at the same time, these lawsuits are there, so it does protect people, so that people have a reasonable standard of living that we have, and that we expectations on society. And civil law regulates relations between individuals or groups of individuals. So it could be where a group of individuals might sue for something, or it might just be one person. It might be against a neighbor. Excuse me. It might be against a neighbor, or it could be against a company. And here we have a civil action is if you had a group of people get together. So you have a civil action or a class action lawsuit can be brought by a person who feels wronged or injured by another person. In civil law, instead of having a prosecution, you have what's called a plaintiff. And so the plaintiff is the person that feels like their house might have been damaged, or their reputation was damaged, or you took something from them, or they feel like you wronged them somehow. And so that person might be suing you. And so that is the plaintiff. In criminal law, that would be called the prosecution. But in civil law, that is the plaintiff. Now, in civil law, you only need a preponderance of the evidence. So in criminal law, you need a beyond a reasonable doubt. But in civil law, you need what's called preponderance of evidence. This is a lower requirement for proof than the beyond a reasonable doubt standard in criminal cases. And the reason for this is that in a criminal case, if you are found guilty, you obviously end up in prison. If in civil law, you do not go to prison, you end up having to pay money. So it's a much lesser penalty. And so preponderance of evidence is what's needed in civil law, which means that you need to be found at least 50% liable to have to pay money. So the plaintiff would have to hope that the business is found 50% at fault or more, and then they would receive compensation for maybe their work or missing days or anything like that. Again, going back to the O.J. Simpson reference, in criminal court, he is found not guilty. In a civil trial, he was found guilty, and he owes the family quite a bit of money now because of that. And finally, just a couple of things from Chapter 2. You learned a lot of this stuff in your government class about writing laws and how a bill becomes a law, and you can probably even sing that Schoolhouse Rock songs. But anyway, these are just a couple things from Chapter 2 real quick. Legislative intent. When the legislature makes a law, what did they actually mean? What they wanted the law to mean versus what the law actually says. And if the language is unclear, oftentimes judges will look at the legislative intent to help them interpret the law. So you have this sign here that says no vehicles allowed in this park. Well, that's a rather vague law to just say no vehicles are allowed. And you can see all the pictures here of things that might be considered vehicles. Does a person riding a bike through there, is that considered to be a vehicle? A tricycle? What if you have a stroller? What about a motorized wheelchair? Or a scooter? Or a motorized moped? What about the person that's mowing the lawn? What if they needed to put a tank in there? They were wanting to put it on display, but they had to drive it in there to put it in display. So these are all different things that the judge would have to look at. What was the intent of that law that no vehicles allowed? And you might think it's kind of elementary to talk about a law like this, but really there are laws that are written that after they're written, all of a sudden they have these unintended consequences because we're not really following what the intent was, we're following what the letter of the law was. And so sometimes judges need to look at that. And that concludes today's lecture.